Hello, Murray. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi there. Welcome.
What time is it in Zurich?
It's 2:40 or 2:20. I'm sorry, 2:20.
2:20. And that's
Yep.
that's not AM.
Oh,
That's PM. Good. I remember the first time I met you. It was in Journey into Wholeness, and it was right over there, about 7 or 8 feet from here. And I knew I had a question or something to debate with you, but I don't remember what it was. But we have surely enjoyed the long friendship. Appreciate your being with us several times. Great to have you here, and great to have your association with Steve. So I'm going to let Steve take over at this time. Good to see you.
thanks, Don.
Hello, Murray. Good to see you.
Hi, Steve.
I'm going to give about a 8-minute introduction, and then we'll turn over to you with that, or maybe shorter. I'm going to spin this way so I can see both. So you can see the side of me, and then the other folks can see the front of me. So that would be clear. I want to say just a few words about the Asheville Young Center and Murray Stein and everything he's done for us. I'm going to lower this. I'm not as tall as Bob, believe it or not. Or I'm not going to lower it. Okay, that's fine. So the Asheville Young Center began about 5 years ago, and it was a brainchild of really Murray and mine. I don't know if you remember, but 5 years ago at the Chicago Institute, Murray, you and I kind of met and said, why don't we try this experiment, thinking that it was just a 1, maybe 2-time event, and it has just exploded since then. We wanted to connect Asheville with Zurich, Switzerland, and Murray. And then every month or two we did them, they got larger and larger. We have 20,000 kind of people worldwide that receive our emails, and we have 50 countries that connect, sometimes all simultaneous with us. We've now done 40 seminars, and the majority of which have been with Murray. Murray's done most of our seminars with that. And they're wide-ranging, from individuation to the basics of Jungian psychology as well. We're about to change our format, and this would be a good time to let people know what we're doing. Starting July 27th, our new format are Saturday mornings, noon to 1:30. That's evening time for Murray, but that allows people who are working, allows young centers to join us. Should be a whole lot easier with that. We've already had 2 or 3 young centers sign up, meaning that if you have a group of people, it doesn't have to be a formal young center, but if you want to meet for an hour and a half with us through Skype, through virtually the same technology, different brand, but it's like Skype, you could be at your center with 5, 10, 15 people, and you could plug in with us, and we could do this kind of live. We split any proceeds, any money you raise, half covers our overhead, you keep the other half. And then after you unplug, you can have a conversation on what you just learned with that. So be thinking about that. If anybody wants to join our Saturdays from Zurich, please do. July 27th is art. Murray and a couple other analysts are going to be talking about art and Jungian psychology. John Hill, anybody know John Hill? John Hill is a wonderful Irishman living in Zurich, has done a few things of ours, incredible, neat guy. Just you'll see if you ever see anything John Hill does. He's going to do it on the afterlife. So life after death from a Jungian perspective. John Hill, September 21st. And then November 23rd, Ursula Wirtz and Trauma, another wonderful Jungian analyst, is going to do that with us. So if anybody wants to join us, please do. If you're not getting our emails, give me or Ryan your email. We'll add it to our list of 20,000, and you'll start receiving those. But we would love to have any of the Jungian groups of people from here that would like to join us. We would love to have that. So Saturdays at noon. So today, Murray Stein is going to be speaking to us. We're going to make it as interactive as possible. Every so often, Murray will break, and people can come up to this microphone. At the time, turn and face that camera right there. Murray can see you. You can talk to him. He can talk to you. You can ask him a direct question on anything you've heard, and it's a delightful way to feel like you're in Zurich. It's just close to Zurich. He's outside of Zurich itself, but was in Zurich this morning. Murray has already been partly introduced, but I'll kind of finish that up. Amazing Jungian. I think he's one of the kind of foremost Jungians really in the world. He's been, up until recently, president of one of the institutes there, the International School of Analytical Psychology. in Zurich, Switzerland. Stepped down recently. There's a new president there. He's been president of the main Jungian body, International Association of Analytical Psychology. He's written a huge amount. If you Google him in Amazon or anywhere else, you'll see just a huge number of books he's written that are really just fabulous, fabulous books. Lots of articles, lots of presentations, 30 or so from us in the National Young Center. He has a Master's of Divinity, which is from Yale, which is interesting to this group here. He has a PhD in religion and psychology, so he's got a lot of academic training. And is a supervising training analyst at the ISAP, International School of Analytical Psychology, Zurich. So without further ado, we will turn it over to Dr. Murray Stein.
Thank you, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hear and see? Okay, good. I'm sitting in my office here in the middle of Switzerland, in the mountains of Switzerland, near the capital, Bern. It's called the Bernese Oberland, not very far from the Jungfrau and famous ski areas and so on. Quite a long distance from you all in North Carolina at Canoga. So it's one of the wonders of our age that we can do this kind of thing. I can be here and speak with you, and you can speak back to me, and we can have a conversation and a dialogue. And I hope that what I'm saying today will relate to your own experience, to maybe some dreams you've had, maybe life experiences you've had, and we could share some of that in our discussion later. What I'd like to do is to kind of give you a piece of theory first in this first section on liminality and transformation, and then after the break in the second part to give you some examples of transformation processes using three famous people, Rembrandt, Picasso, and Newton. And then in the third part, we'll have discussion, questions, issues that you would like to raise, and I will attempt to respond. So to begin, I would like to bring myself a little closer to you, and I will read the first couple of paragraphs from my book called Transformation, Emergence of the Self. And after I read this, I think you'll see why I'm doing this. Day in late November, while I was taking a walk along a well-traveled road in the hills of North Carolina, my eye happened to fall upon a chubby caterpillar busily scrooching along and hurrying down the side of the road. I paused to watch its progress, as over the next 30 minutes it pushed along the gravel road for a considerable distance. The sun was still warm in the autumn sky, and it raised some sweat on my skin as I stood and watched and slowly followed the progress of the determined creature. I had time to wonder what the caterpillar was thinking. I guessed that it was heading for a sheltered place in which it would spin its cocoon and begin pupation. The place must be safe from predators and protected against wind and storms. I wondered if the caterpillar thought about what was going to happen. It was intent on getting somewhere, doing something, and doing it urgently, but did it know what it was in for? Did it have a vision? Can a caterpillar dream of flying? That experience of watching that caterpillar was very close to where you are. That was at Canoga, back probably at the meeting where I first met Bob, back in the 1990s. And that was a very important part of my life at that time. I lived in Chicago and came to Journeys into Wholeness many times. I met Marion Woodman there and wonderful other people, worked together and gave lectures. And I felt a very special relationship to people at these conferences. And I think what Bob Payton has done is continue that tradition. And the very site that we used to meet in Journey into Wholeness at Canoe. My interest in the butterfly as a symbol goes back quite a long time. And I use that symbol in this book, Transformation, Emergence of the Self, as a central metaphor for this process of going into a state of liminality and transformation. Years ago, and I'm going to read another little bit from my book, a person in Texas told me a dream. And it's a dream, maybe you've read it in some of the things I've written, or you've heard me give it before, but I'd like to start our session today with this image of a process of transformation that very much resembles the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly. This is a dream of a woman in her middle years, in her 30s, who was going through a very difficult period of time in her life. And she told me this dream in the context of an analytic session. She said, in the dream, I'm walking along a road feeling depressed. Suddenly, I stumble on a gravestone and look down to see my own name on it. At first, I am shocked, but then strangely relieved. I find myself trying to get the corpse out of the coffin and realize that I am the corpse. It's becoming more and more difficult to hold myself together because there is nothing left to keep the body together anymore. I go through the bottom of the coffin and enter a long, dark tunnel. I continue until I come to a small, very low door. I knock. An extremely old man appears and says, "So you have finally come." I notice he is carrying a staff with two snakes entwined around, facing one another. Quietly but purposefully, he brings out yards and yards of Egyptian linen and wraps me from head to foot in it, so I look like a mummy. And he hangs me upside down from one of many hooks on the low ceiling and says, "You must be patient, it's going to take a long time." Inside the cocoon, it's dark. I can't see anything that's happening. First, my bones hold together, but later I feel them coming apart. Then everything turns liquid. I know that the old man has put one snake at the top and one at the bottom, and they are moving from top to bottom, and back and forth from side to side, making figure eights. Meanwhile, I see the old man sitting at a window, looking out on the seasons as they pass. I see winter come and go, then spring, summer, fall, and winter again. Many seasons go by. In the room, there is nothing but me in this cocoon, with the snakes, the old man, and the window open to the seasons. Finally, the old man unwraps the cocoon. There's a wet butterfly. I ask, "Is it very big or small?" "Both," he answered. "Now you must go to the sun to dry you out." We go to a large room with a big circle cut out at the top. I lie in the circle of light under this to dry out while the old man watches over the process. He tells me that I am not to think of the past or the future, but just be there, be still. Finally, he leads me to the door and says, "Leave, you can go in all four directions, but you are to live in the middle." Now the butterfly flies up into the air. Then it descends to the earth and comes down on a dirt road. Gradually it takes on the head and body of a woman, and the butterfly is absorbed. And I can feel it inside my chest. This dream, which is really a classic image of metamorphosis of midlife, has always remained in my mind as a kind of model for midlife transformation process. And I want to say a few words about the stages of this process, and especially to focus on the middle stage that I refer to this book and the earlier book I wrote called In Midlife as the stage of liminality. So I'm going to spend a little time just defining these two terms, liminality and transformation, so that we're on the same page. And you can follow my comments later about the biographies that I've discussed with you. This term liminality comes from a Latin word meaning threshold, limen. And it's the threshold between two rooms. The doorway, as you step out of one room, and before you enter the next room, you are in an in-between position. You're betwixt and between. So liminality is called that state of being betwixt and between fixed spaces or positions. In psychological terms, fixed identities. And so it's a position of betwixt and between is very important in some work of two great anthropologists, Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner. And Arnold van Gennep, about 100 years ago, French anthropologist, wrote a book on rites of passage, rite de passage, and he studied the initiation rituals of Aborigine young men in Australia. And he divided the ritual process into three parts. There's a phase of separation where the young men were taken at the age of maybe 10, 11, 12, something like that, 13, just as they're turning into puberty, are taken out of the home's context of family life and living with their mothers and sisters and so on, taken out, taken away from the village, taken away from their mothers, and taken out into the bush with the men. And so this first set of rituals that removes the young man, called rites of separation. There is a process of leaving one space and entering into this ritual process. So these rites of leave-making, we'll talk about that a bit. The ways in which we leave, very important to think about. How do you leave something? How do you leave a phase of your life behind? How do you leave sometimes a person behind? How do you leave a job? How do you leave life itself? Leave-taking, very important subject to consider in our lives, how we leave. And then, as Van Gennep described these rituals of initiation, he said the young men are taken out with the older men into the bush, and there they might spend a few weeks or a few months even, going through various initiation rituals, ordeals, sometimes even very dangerous to the young men, but really marking them, giving them a sense of the lore of the tribe, the mythology of the tribe, the ancestors, evoking the ancestors by use of masks and various practices, sounds, churika, musical instruments. Sometimes these are very scary, they take place at night, but they evoke archetypal as we call them, archetypal images, mythological figures from the ancestral past. And so they are induced into the lore of the tribe and the identity of the tribe, and they are given a new name during this process, and they are taught some of the skills of the men, maybe hunting, fishing, and they are also informed about their new responsibilities that they will carry after the initiations as young men. So those are called the rites of liminality. And that's really the heart, the core of the transformation process, the initiation process. And then the third stage, he called it rites of re-entry, where these young men are brought back to the village and reintroduced into the life of the village and into the structured society that they live in, adults, rules, regulations. But introduced with their new names and their new identities. And so now they assume new roles within the society, and they're looked upon in a different way. Now they're no longer children, they're young men, and so forth. So Arnold van Gennep wrote a very important book, The Rites of Passage, on this subject. And then this was later picked up by another important American anthropologist, Turner. And he studied similar rites of passage among African primal people, also practicing their rites of initiation. And what he really focused on was particularly the phase of liminality. And he describes it at great length in his books. What he described were communities of liminal people. So that he wanted to look at the social aspect of liminality and initiation rituals. And he said, when he discusses these communities, he uses the word communitas, and he says that the people who inhabit these spaces all stand on the same level. There are no gradations. There are no higher and lower. Now, the ritual elders would be higher. They're in charge of ceremonies and so on. But these people who live within liminality, he said, all live on the same level, and they are invisible to the rest of the community. They will often go naked through the streets or painted in white, like ghosts. And they will pass through other groups of people who will ignore them, who won't see them, who won't look at them. These are invisible people. And they, of course, feel this invisibility. They're not a part of society anymore. They've fallen out. They've gone out. And they float in another kind of social space. And in that community of liminal people, they gradually are inducted into tribal lore and some knowledge, hidden knowledge about the secrets of the tribe and so on. And then after a certain point, they are released from this, they go back into their normal society, structured society, but at another level and with another social identity. And so this notion of liminal communities has been picked up by a number of other people, and it's very interesting to consider, when are we in liminal communities? I teach, as Steve said, at a school here in Zurich called the International School of Analytical Psychology. And students come here from all over the world. I think we have students from 20 nations, and from Asia and Europe and North and South America and Africa. And they arrive in Zurich and enter into the community of students as complete novices, all at the same level. They all have to be interviewed. They all have to be accepted into the community. There's a rite of passage in. They have to enter in. And of course, they've left behind their home countries, many of them their families, their communities, and they enter into this community of students where they're all on the same level. They all have to do the same thing. They all have to pass the same exams. Outside of this community, they exist at very different levels of society. Some are highly trained and skilled in their other professions, whether it's psychiatrists, psychologists. Some come from other professions like the law or academics, many different areas, architecture, artists. But in this community, it's level. They're all the same. And it's very disorienting at first. It's very confusing. And you have to learn the ways of this community. And there's a student association. They get together and commiserate sometimes about how miserable they are. At the same time, they're all very intensively engaged in a project. That project is learning how to become Jungian analysts. And this is a very strange project because it isn't only academic. There is an academic aspect to it. You have to read books and study, go to seminars and so on. But really, the much more profound level of training goes on in the privacy of their own analytic work with their analysts. And it's an inner formation process. They are becoming butterflies. They're being changed. They're going through a metamorphosis. And this takes quite a long period of time. We call it an immersion. It's an immersion process. Well, they might stay here for 5 years with some breaks in between, but and then at the end there's a graduation ceremony and they emerge as fully fledged analysts, and they join the community of analysts, and which is much more structured, has a hierarchy and it's more a functioning community of professionals. But this process I've observed over a long period of time now. First I went through it myself, and I was, it really is very disconcerting and disorienting at first because you're in a strange country, you don't speak the language really, and you're invisible to the Swiss. They pay attention to whatsoever except to charge high fees for everything you want to buy. Otherwise, you're invisible to the civil community, and kind of float for a period of time while you're going through this very, very intense inner process of analysis and learning and studying and formation. So those are, you can think of other liminal communities, prisoners, for instance. When they enter into a prison, they have to take off their normal clothes, their belts, their shoes, and so on. They put on the garb of the prisoners. They all look alike. They all are treated alike, supposedly. I mean, that's general rule anyway, until they're released. So as long as they're in prison and held within that unity of the convicted, it's like they living in community of liminality or communitas. Military is like that. You go in, they shave your head, you're a private, you're treated like all the other privates, doesn't matter if your daddy's a millionaire or a janitor, nobody cares about that, all on the same level. Those are liminal communities. Probably religious communities are like that. There's a period of initiation where you go in as a novice and you leave your old identity behind and you enter into a new period of formation. Now those are community. That what I've given you is a kind of social description of liminality. liminality as community, liminality as a social process, changing an identity, and so on. Jung, or we can use Jungian psychology. I don't know if Jung didn't do this himself, so this is a contribution we make by using some of Jung's ideas to think about this process in an individual way and as a psychological process, not so much as a social process. And I will talk about that a good deal later when we look at these examples of three persons who go through the transformation process to form their full-fledged adult selves. But in psychological terms, we would speak of states of mind, states of consciousness, and we would speak of what Jung referred to as the individuation process. So what I've done in these books is to take some of the work of the social anthropologists and apply it to the process of individuation, and look at liminality as a psychological state of mind. I want to just say a few words about that state of mind and why it's important to enter into that to some extent, at least, in order to go through a process of transformation. Now, when you look at the butterfly, it's a very interesting creature because it really has two incarnations, in a sense. At first, what you see is a worm or a caterpillar. That's called the larva stage. And it crawls on the ground. You would never suspect that this creature is ever going to fly. It's very humble looking insect, easily overlooked, sometimes quite colorful. But it's just the forerunner of what it's going to become. Now, this creature may exist for quite a long period of time at this larva stage. It may live there for months. And the final stage, the butterfly stage, would be relatively short, weeks or so. So it isn't a matter of length of time on the ground in this world. It's a question of form. And when we speak of transformation, we're talking about something to do with form, in which a new form appears or emerges out of a previous form. Now, the butterfly goes through a very dramatic change of form. Human beings do too, actually. When you look at small children, and you look at adults, and you think, how did one get from here to here? On the physical level, we change quite a bit. We mentioned adults. On the psychological level, which is what I want to look at, we also go through very, very significant changes in the course of our lifespan. And this in-between stage, it's called the pupa stage, in the life of the butterfly is an enclosed, encapsulated, you could say shut off, introverted, deeply inner, quiet, dark process going on inside the shell of the pupa, and it practically dissolves completely, and then reformulates itself into a very different looking sort of creature, to a butterfly eventually. Now, what scientists have discovered is that the caterpillar, in its makeup, in its genetic makeup, includes very small but very important structures. They call them imaginal discs. Imaginal discs. They're like potential structures, but they're built into the being of the caterpillar, but they don't emerge until later. And when the caterpillar goes into this dissolve state in the pupa stage and inside the container of the chrysalis, these imaginal discs get activated and they grow into the wings of the butterfly, the antenna of the butterfly. They come forward, they emerge, they become much more apparent. They move from a latency to a manifest stage to the extent that the other creature completely disappears. And then when the new insect hatches from the chrysalis, comes out, dries itself off, and begins flying around, it's called the imago of the insect, the imago. So the imaginal discs grow or emerge and take over, and they produce what's called the imago. And the imago is the full-fledged, final adult form of the insect. And that's the notion that I use in my book on emergence of the self, that something like this happens on a psychological level in human beings. That there are certain potentials there in a very latent form. We could say they're archetypal centers, possibilities within the psyche that aren't very visible when a person is younger. But they're there. And as the person grows older, and if they develop, if they individuate, if they go through an individuation process, they will go through stages of transformation along the way, so that in their final form, in their adulthood, they will assume the form that they potentially always were, but it was latent. And this formation of the full potential is the end result of the individuation process. So transformation, as we think about it, isn't so much change as emergence of the latent into the manifest. But as that happens, often what was manifest before starts falling away. So people do change in their identities, in their affiliations, in their thinking, in their attitudes, their philosophy of life, all of those ways. And aspects that were unconscious earlier come forward into consciousness and become integrated, become in their lives. And so they begin to fill out the full potential of who they were from the moment of their birth. We could say that the self, the potential self, is there in the womb, but it isn't very manifest. And it takes time for it to emerge. The human being goes through several of these very important stages of transformation in the course of a lifetime in order for that potential to become manifest. And when we look at liminality, the importance of these moments of liminality in the psychological development process, in the individuation process, what we see happening is the dissolving of some old structures, falling away of some old structures. Now I'm talking about things like identity, identification, affiliation, sense of self even, and entering into a period of confusion, sometimes disorientation, while a space is being created for something that was previously unconscious to emerge into consciousness. So this breaking down, you could say they're creative illnesses. This is Henry Ellenberger's term for Jung's life experience. He wrote the Red Book, which I'll talk about later. He called it the creative illness. These creative illnesses, which sometimes extend over quite a period of time, are very important from individuation perspective. They might look like a breakdown from a social perspective. And they're quite scary and frightening people if they don't understand what's happening or can't work with this. And this is often the case with people who come into psychotherapy, into analysis. They don't understand what's going on with them, but they know something's happening and they're changing and they feel a strong need to change and don't know how. And so it's the job of the therapist to accompany them and maybe help them get some of the impediments out of the way, clear some space for new ideas, new attitudes, new feelings to come out, even to integrate the shadow aspects of oneself that one has denied or repressed or not lived adequately before, projected onto other people. All these things start coming home and coming up from the inside during a transformation process. And this can sometimes be quite painful as well as very exciting. It can be also very threatening to other people who are reliant or dependent on your identity, and suddenly you're starting to go through a major change process of so sure about you anymore. Now, what I want to emphasize especially today is the emergence in the usually in the second half of life, but not necessarily. It can come earlier or it can come very late in life. The emergence of a what we call an archetypal identity or archetypal connection. And this has very much to do with the development of a spiritual attitude, individual spirituality I'm talking about now. It doesn't have to be so different from collective forms, but when the self emerges fully, what one experiences is the presence of the numinous other within. And this might come in the form of a dream, might come in the form of active imagination, might come in the form of certain new interests that lead and draw in a certain direction toward a spiritual life. And Jung sometimes speaks about a dual identity. In a work called Concerning Rebirth, for instance, he is speaking to an audience of people at Aeronautes in Switzerland. And that's my telephone, I'm going to ignore it. And he's talking about this experience of the inner other that one has when one really engages in deep active imagination and dream work and so on. The inner other as a kind of teacher or guide or an immortal, he says. Sometimes we have this experience of an immortal and or an archetypal image that comes up in a dream, a really special figure like great teacher, wise old man, wise old woman, something like that. And then one works with that. And as he talks about this, and he's giving some examples of this in his lecture concerning rebirth. And suddenly, and he's talking about these twins, Greek twins, Dioscuri. They're called the Dioscuri. One is mortal and one is immortal, but they're twins. They come from the same mother. And he says, we are all like this. We all have an inner twin. The ego has a twin in the inner world that is an immortal. And then he wheels on the audience and he says to them, and you are the Dioscuri. Every one of you is the Dioscuri. So he brings the mythology from the outside to the inside. And he says we're all immortals somewhere in us. And in the course of individuation and these rebirth experiences and transformation experiences, we will discover that inner other, that immortal within. And I think that is one of the unique features of Jungian psychology. I don't know of other psychologies that talk about this. Religions sometimes refer to it, or there are stories about it. If you read the Bible carefully, you will find these kinds of events when Jacob meets the angel at night and they wrestle all night long. He's struggling with an immortal. And what happens? He gets a new name. And he gets blessed and he gets wounded. So this struggle with the inner other, a connection with the inner other, brings with it an initiation when you get a new name. So that's what you want to look for in your dreams. Have you heard your new name? Have you heard your name called by the immortal other within? And this does happen. I can assure you, I've heard a lot of people. Doesn't always happen in every analysis by a long shot, but I think if you look carefully at dreams, you will see that level in the background going on. You will see that stirring in the depths of the dream matrix. And Jung was fascinated with that. And he thought that's really what individuation is in its highest form, in its best form, is really all about. Now, he wrote about that many different ways, in different places. And if you want to read, I would refer you to a really fascinating text. It's in the Collected Works, Volume 12, called Psychology and Alchemy, and it's part 2, and it's a discussion of a series of dreams, dreamed by a scientific young man in Zurich who was going through a very difficult time in his life. And we know now who that was. It was the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, and a lot of it has been written about this in the meantime. And Pauli's dreams and his active imaginations, he kept a dream journal for the whole rest of his life, like 20 volumes of it in his archives. He was a genius, a scientific genius. He won a Nobel Prize for physics. But at this early time in his life, he was in his 30s or so, he was going through a very difficult period. And he went into analysis, and he had this dream series, which he gave to Jung to look at. And in this work that he published, in Psychology and Alchemy, he discusses the symbols in the dreams. He doesn't discuss the dream, doesn't talk about the dreamer very much at all. I mean, the dreamer wasn't in analysis with him. He's just looking at the symbols in the dreams. So he's looking like behind the personal element that most analysts would be very engaged with. Of course, working with patients, you're always very confronted with the personal, and it's very hard to see past it, archetypal and the symbolic. But Jung wasn't distracted by that in this text. He could just look for the symbols. And what he finds there is amazing. I mean, it's this whole process of the emergence of the inner companion, of the inner other, of the mortal self, and the connection that the dreamer is being introduced into with this other element of his personality. When this happens, the individuation process, you have a completely different sense of yourself than you had before. You're the same person. You still have the same family. You have the same friends and so on. On the inner level, you have a connection to eternity, to the divine. You are a child of God, not only in name and word, but in experience. And so this, he calls this deification sometimes, or the solidification process, the deification process. It isn't that the ego becomes inflated and divine, but it is put in connection with the divine on an inner level, a level of experience. And so this is what comes out of the opening to the unconscious. And that opening to the unconscious is really the essence of the liminality experience. In liminality, there is this possibility to open to the unconscious in a very special way that's different from the way we normally go about our lives in very practical ways and every day, having to deal with all kinds of things. Now, you're out there at Kanuga for 3 or 4 days in a condition of liminality. I'm sure you're having big dreams out there, and you're talking about them and you're relating to them. This is a terrific opportunity for you to connect to this inner other that is more than you know who have been, you know who you are. And then to work with that through active imagination and dream work and so on that you're all doing there. I'm sure very intensively. Just one more thing I want to say before we take our break in about 5 minutes or so. And that is that one can think of transformations in a small and in a major sense. Small transformations that go on practically on a daily basis, or can, and then large transformational periods of really major inner emergence and transformation. So one thinks of the big ones as periods in life like adolescence, where all kinds of new things are emerging and new identity forming. Midlife is another one for many people, not always, but for many people, maybe even around the age of 30, sometimes around the age of 50, another one. And then in later years, in older age, very important ones that have to do with really reaching further into this archetypal world of the self and the spiritual world. And you could say, ultimately, what we're all preparing for is really a big transformation when we die. Now, the image of the butterfly, the movement from the caterpillar through the cocoon stage to the butterfly, is an ancient image for death and the afterlife. In Aztec culture, for instance, those heroes that died on the battlefield fighting were reborn as butterflies. On the tombs of Etruscan, on the inside of the burial vault, they would paint butterflies. Kubler-Ross found butterflies painted on the walls of some of the death camps in Europe after the Second World War. Children painting butterflies on the walls of the death camps before they were murdered. And so the butterfly is an ancient symbol for the soul. And the idea was that this form, this soul that we contain in our caterpillar stage while we're on Earth is released at the moment of death. And at the moment of death, we become what we've always been, potentially, pure soul. a full soul, a soul that can fly and soar, do things that we can't do in categories. So it's an image for the immortal soul, for immortality that follows upon the death of our physical beings in this dimension. And so many philosophers have said, life, especially the second half of life, the most important task is to prepare for death. How do you prepare for something like that? I think you prepare for it by beginning to get a sense for it and get a sense for what that immortal in you looks like. And Jung, for instance, was fascinated by the texts of the Chinese alchemists in The Secret of the Golden Flower. He wrote a great. And what these Chinese alchemists were doing was preparing for their afterlife by building what they called a diamond body through their meditations. And their idea was that we have two souls, and the one soul dies with the body, and the other soul departs and goes into its new form, the diamond body. And so their meditations were preparations for this afterlife. John Hill, as Steve said, is going to talk about the afterlife from a Jungian perspective in September. So if you want to tune in, I'm sure you'll have very interesting things to say about it. But we can look on death as a period, a moment of liminality and transformation and entry into a new stage of life where we can fly. We aren't grounded anymore. But before that, we also, of course, go through a lot of transformations in a much smaller sense, much smaller way. And I would encourage you to look at how you take leave and when you take leave of things. To think of small moments of liminality in your life as you're turning away from somebody and going into another direction. When you leave Kanuga, or when you left your home and came to Kanuga, how you take leave and the period of time, that in-between time, till you come into a new space. Think of that as liminal period, and there's an opening. There's a kind of openness to something new, expectation, maybe some confusion, even anxiety in this in-between space. And to observe how you take leave and how you say goodbye and leave a room or leave other people or leave a phase of your life, say changing a job or changing you're going through a change in your marital status, changing into retirement, how you say goodbye to your past and then begin entering into your new. That liminal period is a moment of opportunity to let something new arise in your imagination, to watch your dreams, to watch your feelings, and to think about what it is to leave and then later to arrive as a new kind of person, perhaps, a new setting, a new situation. These are the nuances, these are the small points, but I think they're very important. So we don't just have this idea of big, life-changing transformations. We have many small ones. And the small ones add up over time, also into a major kind of lifestyle. The way we live our lives and the way we conduct ourselves in life is an expression of our souls and our psyches. So I think, is this a good time to take a break, Steve?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Rose.
Hi, Rose.
Good morning. Good afternoon. It's curious that this time, maybe last year or the year before, I was standing here trying to articulate a question about the Red Book, the section of the Red Book in which Jung goes into this messy part of his life and is encountered by and encounters a young girl who is attached to a kind of nasty man, hooked and so forth in, I think, the eye, and it's really, really very grotesque. And we talked a little bit about this, and I can see your face kind of contorting, so you seem to remember exactly what I'm talking about. And it's interesting to me that he was required in that part of the Red Book to eat the liver of the maiden in order to become the healer that he later became, as you explained it to me that day. Now, it's interesting to me that today you began talking about a woman who is going through a liminality transformation process that required her in her dream. Is that right? Was that a woman?
Yes.
That's right. To imagine or be imagined as someone who was disintegrating. And so I guess the question that's forming in me is this whole messy stuff of disintegration essentially an anabolic process? Or if it is, and if it is, then that means it's both for men and women. But is the earthy stuff of dissolution, is that sort of part of the animal process? Or if not, is the way that Jung formulated his animal ideas kind of a culturally determined construct that needs to be broadened such that it doesn't get attached just to the feminine, this whole idea of dissolution. Is that clear?
I get the gist of it, yes.
Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, Rose, I think I'll try. First of all, Jung's theory and formulations and conceptualizations and so on are, of course, culturally conditioned. How could they not be? He did his best to step outside of his time and culture by visiting other countries, other cultures, and so on. But his roots are in his time and in his culture. And so everybody is time and culture bound. That doesn't mean that one's notions are entirely irrelevant, though, in other times and cultures. And what he tried to do was to penetrate to a level of depth or a level of generalization, if you will, that was universal. That was his theoretical ambition, to speak about universals and not only about cultural forms and patterns and cultural complexes and so on. And to do that, he developed this idea of archetypes. That the archetype is a universal. In order to qualify as an archetype, a motif or a theme, image has to be found everywhere, in all times, in all cultures. Otherwise, you can't say you've got an archetype by the scruff of the neck. You've got a cultural pattern, cultural form. But to qualify as an archetype, this theme, motif, image, has to be a universal. And so the question would be, what in the individuation process is universal? It's sometimes been said that Jung's notion of individuation is very Western. It's very modern. It's very European. I would say if that's the case that it isn't archetypal, but I think there are elements in it that are archetypal and that he certainly wanted to claim as archetype. And if you can find this pattern dissolving, let's say, going into a state of solutio, as the alchemists call it, represented in stories, myths, religions, cultural representations, art, worldwide through time and space, and you could say that it is definitely archetypal. This falling apart, this coming to pieces, is that more typical of female figures in myth and fairy tale and story than it is of male figures? I don't know. I don't know that it is selfly that I think the experience of liminality is universal. That is, the experience of going into a kind of altered state of consciousness in which identity becomes questioned, and through which initiations and transformations can take place. That seems to be, you can find that in every time and every place and every culture. There are examples of it. But I think after that, the specifics, we have to stay with culture, we have to stay with individuals. And I don't know if I could say it's more typical of the feminine and the masculine to come apart like this. I doubt it. But I haven't really studied that third.
Excuse me, Murray, I think I can bail you out. Because we just got a presentation about Egyptian mythology in which
Yes, that's right.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
And Osiris is kind of classic dismemberment. So I think
That's
I just answered my own question. My own dreams, of course, of dismemberment are my own personal ones as a woman, and they're very gruesome, and it feels very visceral. And so I think naturally of the Earth Mother and the process of dying into the earth in order to be reborn and so forth. And thank you for your empathic gaze just now. You know, your face is showing the difficulty that this is, but you've given me enough to do some process with it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that reference to Osiris. That helps a lot. Yeah, I think, and of course there are other myths of dismemberment in Zosimos, which was an alchemist Gnostic that Jung was very fond of. There's a famous moment of dismemberment where I think it's a man's body, it's dissolved and taken apart, goes into a solutio process. So maybe if one Googled dismemberment, one could.
And as you two were talking, I was thinking about Salvador Dali's picture of the man's head that's coming apart.
Oh, yes.
Familiar with that one? Yeah. So
Yes.
it looks like in this age, we're in the atomic age, that it is universal. I mean, we could literally all come apart like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting perspective that you introduced there, and that is liminality of humankind itself, or cultural liminality, world culture liminality. Jung felt that we're going through a process at the end of a big Platonic year, the age of Pisces, moving into a new configuration of culture in the age of Aquarius. And he felt this would bring about dramatic shifts, changes, cultures worldwide. So you can extend this notion of liminality from individuals to families, societies, cultures. And it may be that we are now, as a world community, I mean, I think many people are thinking along these lines, are going through such a period of time and not quite fully aware of it, that we are really betwixt and between, but we've left one set of dominant structures and ideas and attitudes maybe 100 years ago already. We're moving toward new set of structures and attitudes that will be quite different from what human culture has known until now. There are hopes that it will be for the better.
Yeah.
And there are suspicions that it might not be for the better, but it does seem that many parts of the world are caught up in this feeling of being betwixt and between right now.
I was handed a note by Rose just to remind us that Isis, the divine feminine, pulls Osiris back together. So just to add that. Do you want to go back? You were waiting there for a minute. Almost together.
Hi, Maria Jameson Haverkamp. I have a question about the inner energy required during the liminal process. I am very much in my caterpillar mumminess right now, and I'm curious about, I think it's Marion Woodman who talks about putting a minimal amount of energy into the outer world during this time because so much energy is required during doing this inner work in the liminal process. And I've experienced this, the inner energy required is physically very intense and taking a lot of my energy. And I don't have as much for the outer world. Can you speak to suggestions either from yourself or Young about managing kind of this imbalance of energy that, I mean, I don't know, maybe it doesn't go on with everybody, but how you would manage that when this can take a long time?
Right, okay. We speak about progression of libido and regression of libido. That's one way to think about it. When your energy is progressing into life, there is a kind of a movement forward, an expansiveness, adaptation to the world around you, whether you introverted or extroverted. You could do it in different ways. But basically, you're object-oriented and you're going outward and you're creating a life in a social sense and in a cultural sense. These are periods of growth and development that everybody can see. It's very outer and it's very evident. When the libido regresses for whatever reason, and there are different reasons it might regress. One reason might be a traumatic experience, a break, like you experience a break Freud, or it might be a kind of feeling of stagnation, meaninglessness, boredom, futility, kind of depression sets in at a certain stage of life, and things that have been interesting and valuable to you and meaningful to you aren't anymore, or not to the same level of intensity. And then there's this regression of libido. And regression of libido means that the energy is flowing inward, not outward. It's not going into adaptation, build, construction. It's kind of disappearing from view, and it's activating parts of the unconscious, parts of your inner world, your subjectivity, that were dormant before, or that were repressed, or that were just unconscious, not as. Now, you could say liminality is this experience of regression of libido. When you don't have as much for outer activities, but you're drawn toward introspection. You're drawn toward the inner world. And this is exactly what happened in Jung's Red Book period, when it wasn't just the break from Freud, I think that triggered it, but then he resigned some positions that he had at the university and other professional positions, editorship, and this and that. And it wasn't that he was rejecting them, it was that he just lost interest in them. They didn't mean anything to him anymore. And what meant something to him was this inner process that had really taken over and doing in a very intense way. And then his painting and his working on the Red Book. And so that started taking up an enormous amount of energy. If you think how much energy it took to create that Red Book, you know, that was spent in his home, in his office, in the privacy of his space, and without anybody else around. He was very introverted. He was very interior. And then after a certain number of years, he started coming out again. And so then there was again a progression of libido, but now as a different kind of person, different interests and different priorities, different perspectives. He wasn't into becoming king of the world anymore before he was the crown prince of the psychoanalytic movement. It was a leader. I was much more a private teacher. People came to him, smaller groups. It wasn't the big show and extroverted to the professional world the same way, although he was still active there, but in a different way. So this is progression and regression of libido. When the libido regresses, it's much more introverted. And I think culture that you all live in America, it's a little bit different here in Europe and Switzerland. It's a little more introverted here. But you live in an excessively, I would say, exaggerated, extroverted culture. This is known from the outside by the rest of the world. We aren't the only one. I think Brazil is very similar. There are countries that have this extraordinary amount of one-sided extroversion. If you want to go to the opposite side, maybe Japan or cultures that are much more introverted, much more kind of holding back in themselves. And Switzerland is much more introverted. It's a good place for you to come when you want to go inward and follow your dreams and do active imagination. Switzerland's an ideal place. So students come here and go on an inner journey and experience. And people here respect privacy much more. So when you're doing this in America, you're kind of odd to other people. Here you wouldn't look so odd if you're doing that kind of thing. Just a private person just like we are. You know, we don't see her for a few months at a time. That's no big deal. So I think it is more difficult for Americans to afford themselves. It's not, I spent most of my life there, so I know it very well. I know how hard it is to get out of the collective. You're surrounded by it. It's constantly in your face. The news and the music and the media, all of that is constantly bombarding. It's very difficult to step out into a personal inner space. And yet, very important to do that at a certain times in life. So, when I've worked with people on this issue, the question always is, how can I how can I find a place of innocence and solitude, quiet, and it's a noisy country, and people interacting with each other, and that's beginning to be a So, I think experiences like you're having at Canuga do, even though it's in a collective, you're in a group, you're still interacting with each other, but I think you do value the privacy of dream work and interiority as respect that you develop a sense of soul in spaces like this. And it isn't so common, so frequent in American life, but I think it is available, and you all have found a good place to begin your inner journey, continue your inner journey for Canuga. And then there are some times when you just have to take a break and, disappear for a while.
Yep.
Maybe you go to Alaska, or you come to Switzerland, or take a sabbatical. You know, when I was in Israel, I was there for 2 Sabbaths. And in Jerusalem, on the Sabbath, it's very hard to find a restaurant that's open. I mean, the city just closes down from Friday sundown until Saturday sundown. Much of the city is closed. In some neighborhoods, you can't even drive a car. And this is the Sabbath. So, on the Sabbath, I asked somebody, what do you do on the Sabbath? Because you can't drive a car, you can't even turn lights on and off. So many things you can't do, lots of rules. And these were observant Jews who, the wife is an analyst and the husband is a very successful businessman, they have a big family. I said, what do you do on the Sabbath? He said, oh, the Sabbath, it's the day to recharge our batteries. He's a chemical engineer, he's into batteries. Okay? A day to recharge our batteries. I said, yeah, but what do you do? Oh, well, Friday night, Shabbat, our whole family comes together and we tell stories. And I mean, there's no TV, even the television is off. I mean, imagine that. We talk, we visit, we catch up with each other. It's a family night. Oh, what do you do on Saturdays? Oh, Saturday morning, we go to the synagogue and we pray for a while. And then we come home, and it's a day to be with each other, to be with the family, to read, to just be ourselves, not to go anywhere, not to do any work, not to think about work. You see, this is an age-old tradition that was found to be very useful by the Israelites, 3,000-4,000 years ago, and continues to this day. We have a version of it in Switzerland too. The stores are all closed on Sundays here. There's from 4 o'clock on Saturday until Monday morning, stores are closed. And so it's quiet. You can have a quiet time. Now that's a moment for introversion. It's a period of time when you can let go all your other cares, go inward, you pray, meditate, you read the Bible, you do some active imagination, and it's built into the structure of life. I think it's a wonderful institution. But we've overridden it, like we override the day and night with our electric lights. We don't live with nature. These rhythms that people discovered thousands of years ago are very important to rest, to develop interiority, develop deeper relationships with our families, and so on. And I think it's a great loss that modernity has just put all this stuff aside. And with the religious element, it isn't the same either, because on the Sabbath, it's meant to be close to God, and it's to be close to the Spirit, the spiritual world, and renew the connection to that. So, one's own way, one can do that on an individual basis, but it's difficult. There are many demands, this thing all the time. Cell phones. To put this up for a whole day on a regular basis, not so easy, but I recommend it.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first has arisen when I was listening, and the image of trauma came in my mind and being fragmented, in a state of fragmentation.
Yeah.
And you are frankly using that type of words when you were speaking about transformation. And I was wondering if people feel traumatized, feel fragmented, would you say they could follow the same guidelines? Is there a gradual difference, or would you say, well, keep in mind when you feel fragmented through trauma, don't go to the inner journey and stay there and all those things. You need some cautions or whatever. Can you expand that a little bit?
Yes, sure. So much depends on what kind of trauma it is, what the circumstances of the trauma are, and who's being traumatized. If you're traumatized as a child, sexually abused, and so on. No, there's no way you can use any of this. Ursula Wirtz, who will appear on the national program in November, gave a series of lectures here at Zurich last year on trauma and working with trauma. And she's worked with people all over the world across extremely traumatizing situations, war, disruption, refugee camps, physical abuse of all kinds, and worked with them in therapy. And her feeling, which will appear in the book that will be published from these lectures that we have last year, later this year, is that the cracks are where the light comes through. The cracks are where the light comes through, she says. And having had a lot of experience with trauma and working with trauma, she says that it's paradoxically sometimes in these places of break and disruption and fragmentation that one experiences the healing power of the divine or the presence of the other. There is a kind of opening involved. So there is that possibility. And I think working with people who have been traumatized carefully in therapy, maybe one can arrive at that kind of experience, possibly. But I wouldn't make it a formula or a recipe of any kind. I'm reading a book right now on this Jewish ghetto labor camp called Theresian stuff. It's in the northern part of Czechoslovakia. It's the mildest of the death camps. It wasn't really a death camp, it was a work camp, but a lot of people died there and suffered and so on. And it was a liminal community. Jews were brought from several different parts of Europe and thrown into this camp in a very formal and very rigorous way. It was like suddenly you're taken into a very severe and depriving atmosphere and situation. Take off your clothes, take a shower, and you stand for a couple of hours while your clothes are being deloused. Many people died from this because of the colds they were exposed to. And then you're put into situations where you have nothing, you have no identity other than your name. But out of these camp experiences, there came some extraordinary works and writings, like Frankl's Lothar, for instance. Even in the depths of traumatic experiences like this, where the intention is not all transformational, the intention is punishment or isolation, alienation. It's possible some people have found levels of insight, inspiration, and depth that they couldn't have found in normal life. This isn't to recommend it at all, but it's to say that when it does happen, one could maybe keep an eye out for that. And certainly in many people experience that in like Great Depression and in this recession, terrible suffering happens to people. They lose their possessions and their houses and everything. There is another development that can come into play that is very authentic, psychologically speaking, of individuation and growth and depth, of relationship, of empathy, of caring for others, of moments of transcendence, simply because one is kind of So, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to speak about trauma in these terms, but I think it is possible. And Ursula Wirth speaks about it very movingly as examples, stories about how and why she feels that the cracks are where the light is.
Thank you. That is helpful to have that insight.